History buffs, what is a commonly held misconception that drives you up the wall every time you hear it? Only around 40% of colonists supported the American Revolution. Another 40% was indifferent, and about 20% sided with the British. Most Americans think that it was the vast majority who wanted independence. Yeah, I heard that those who wanted to break away from Britain at that time were considered extremists, and they only started gaining traction after things like increase in taxes and quartering and the Boston Massacre. Ike, is that right? To be fair, it was debt the colonists had incurred managing and fighting themselves what was basically the North American theater of the 7 Years' War. They felt that since Britain, busy fighting that war in Europe, had delegated managing the war to them, they should then get to decide how to pay those debts off. And they also thought Britain might have ulterior motives. A lot of the richest colonists were land rich and cash poor, or at least far too cash poor to pay a land tax, one of the possibilities Parliament was considering, without selling off a lot of the land. Had they had to do so, it's quite likely that a lot of British fat cats would have stood ready to buy them, consolidating a lot of economic, and by extension political, power back in England, away from some of the sort of people who would never have been able to amass that much land in the mother country, and whom the elites wanted kept from that. That people from the past were just less intelligent than modern people. Fact is, humans from even 15,000 years ago were just as intelligent as modern humans, intelligence being the ability to learn and apply knowledge. They just had different things to worry about and had not discovered everything that we know today. The whole of modern civilization is built on discoveries made thousands or tens of thousands of years ago. Our ancestors, starting with nothing but stone tools and basic survival skills, created agriculture, writing, mathematics, standardized language, the wheel, metallurgy, shipbuilding, architecture, trade routes spanning all of Afro-Eurasia, currency, banking, crossbreeding of animals and plants to create better strains, the list goes on. If I plucked a human baby from thousands of years ago, properly immunized it to modern diseases, and raised it as any other child today, you would be unable to tell the difference between them or any other child. Fact is, the only difference between us and our ancient ancestors is the discoveries, philosophies, technology and effort performed, created and understood by the hundreds of generations between us. Our ancient ancestors were simply smart in different ways because we only really learn what we have to. Ancient Polynesians literally memorized the night sky for navigating the innumerable islands of the Indo-Pacific and Oceania. Norse peoples built ships capable of sailing from Europe to America using only hand tools, wood, linen, nails and rope. Ancient East Asian cultures built massive temples out of wood using only precisely crafted wood joints and no nails. Rome built, well, Rome, with hand tools and hand-calculated math. Same can be said of the wonders of Egypt, India and Mesopotamia. Then there is Göbekli Tepe, an amazing structure of precisely placed monoliths, engraved walls and cobblestone paths built nearly 12,000 years ago. Which is nearly 6,000 years prior to our earliest records of advanced civilizations. We stand on the backs of thousands of years of knowledge painstakingly collected and handed down for millennia to us who have taken it and created wonders our ancestors would attribute to gods. Yet we ignore the gargantuan effort that our long-dead kin have contributed to our success and even view them with disdain. Calling them savages, ignorant and fools. Truly we are the ungrateful child looking down on the gracious teacher that our ancestors were. We are the summation of all of humanity, just another step in a long history of advancement, not a separate holy being above it or separate from it. During Paul Revere's midnight ride he did not shout the British are coming. The mission depended on secrecy, so shouting loudly the British are coming kinda defeats the whole purpose. According to several sources, e.g., eyewitness accounts, his warning was likely the regulars are coming out or some variation of that, and probably not loud enough to wake up a village, as I've seen in some media renditions. Edit: if people would like to know the most accurate information regarding what Paul Revere did, probably the most complete account is the letter Paul Revere sent to Jeremy Belknap, corresponding secretary of the Massachusetts Historical Society in 1798. Transcripts can be found online. Medieval peasant food was bland. People seemed to think peasants only ate bread and potatoes with no seasoning. In reality, while salt was indeed a luxury they often couldn't afford, they had access to plenty of herbs to flavor their food. They also had access to things like fish and other meats, so they weren't just eating bread, though it was an important staple of their diet. If you're interested in how a bunch of civilizations ate throughout history, check out Tasting History on YouTube. It's a great source of historical information and entertainment. Edit: meant to include this originally, but as others have also stated, things like potatoes and tomatoes didn't exist in medieval Europe either. They're native to the Americas. So for most of history, the majority of the world didn't even know they existed. Also, their clothes were brown. Visited an Iron Age reconstructed dwelling recently, and they had examples of the sort of wool they could dye from natural sources: deep mustard yellow, dark blue, mulberry and deep green. Basically, they were all sitting about in snazzy woolen clothes like a bunch of hippies. So, for the peasant class, yes, lots of clothing in undyed wool, brown, cream, poor black, being the bulk of it, especially for grubby work. However, not all dyes were expensive. Welt is literally a weed, and produces beautiful yellows. So do onion skins. Yellow, in general, is super easy. Likewise, dyer's broom/dyer's green weed makes green. Woad and madder are more expensive, but not out of reach for most. Only the poorest serfs couldn't afford some bit of color. If not a coat/tunic, they might have bright sleeves or a hood. Dye vats were reused, so second or third discharges would produce less saturated, and more affordable, colored cloth. Something that clicked when I was playing an indie game, Kingdom Come: Deliverance, surprisingly good, was that clothing was made from whatever was around. A neat quirk included in the game, which was made by history buffs, was the fact that clothing colors coincided with the types of flowers available in the landscape. So a local town would have villagers in yellow, a washed-out purple, and types of reds, because that was the types of flowers which grew in abundance in the fields. You just had to gather enough to create dye. If you worked a heavily manual job, you might have a set of clothes for the field, but keeping in mind that the concept of a wardrobe is relatively recent. Clothes tended to be thick and well made, and you'd have a spare set for laundry day. Underclothes got washed more often, and they were uncolored. The process of laundering clothes used to be quite energy intensive, so colorful outer clothes that got washed and dirtied less often was a common thing for Europe. 0 hours. This reminds me of something my third grade teacher did. I had read my older brother's book about pilgrims, and it said that they wore dark colors, dyed from natural items, not just black. In class we were coloring pictures of pilgrims, so I gave mine dark green, brown, and purple clothing. My teacher took a black crayon and colored over the clothing of my pilgrims in my picture. Needless to say, I never forgave her for that. Your teacher was an asshole. I had a similar incident when my preschool class was making American flags out of construction paper strips. Parent and I had recently read a book about the history of the flag, so I made mine with the stripes arranged differently, like one of the early flags in the book, and got told off for doing the project wrong. Still mad about it. That Neanderthals were monosyllabic brutes. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. Their brains were bigger than ours, and casts of the inside of their skulls show that they had all the same structures our brains had. Their tool making was comparable to any Homo sapiens took making, at least before the Great Leap Forward, and they lived in communities just like we did. We also regularly mated with them and had kids, which I really don't think we would if they were little more than quasi-gorillas.